Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn.
I've been going to this church, say, 85 years. My family's been coming here for 6 generations. Everybody, my brothers, my sisters, my uncles, my aunts, my grandparents, everyone in my family just about. I remember my mother telling me, you can't go to church because you haven't had a bath and you're dirty. So I waited till they got into church and I snuck in. And as I was sitting there, she turned around and saw me and she told me to get up and go home. But the pastor told her, don't chase that child out of church. And I remember that. We lived right on Glen Avenue, right up the street there at the time. So that was my first recollection of being in this church.
St. Mark AME Church was the first predominantly African-American church in Wilkinsburg, founded in 1912. And many people wonder what the AME stands for, and it is African Methodist Episcopal. The denomination has a very interesting history, founded in 1787 in Philadelphia by a slave under very trying circumstances. My association with this branch goes back to 1960. My father was a pastor here. We lived in the house that is connected to the church. I used to remark that I could almost literally fall out of bed and land in church. And that wasn't too far from the truth if I, rolled down the steps. And during the crisis in the 1960s, when Reverend Martin Luther King was assassinated, we had the mayor of Wilkinsburg, I think for the first time, visit this church and tried to establish, and did, a center of calm, because not only the borough, the entire country was in a state of upset. And I think that prodded us into seeing that we do have a very logical and important role in what goes on in this community. We do have an influence. Pastors in our denomination every year are subject to being moved from church to church. But my father remained here for 16 years. Every year when we would go to the conference and see if we were going to change, our members petitioned the conference to have him stay here. And he stayed here until his passing.
We moved to Wilkinsburg. We were a family of 10 children. In 1943, I think it was. And in 1944, the pastor of this church, who was Reverend Butcher, came and asked my mother if the children could come to Sunday school. And my mother said, if they want to go.
They are steep in their history. They have a foundation from which to stand. They have what, if you look at Hebrews, a cloud of witnesses that have gone before them who have really laid the foundation. That's what you need. You can visit other places and you don't feel that solid foundation, but St. Mark has a solid foundation, a true history in which to stand on.
It's not just bricks and mortar. It's the feeling that this church was their spiritual center. This was where their Sunday school met. And like many of the churches in Wilkinsburg, this was where the children grew up and learned their morals and learned how to behave themselves and learned how to care for others.
Our comfort zone was right outside that red door down there. And we would say, Mom, can we go to the corner? Which meant we were going right here. And you can go to the corner, but you have to be back at 9:30. So we went to, and that's our where we congregated. It was nice, it was comfortable, it was playtime, and everybody enjoyed themselves. But at 9:30, everybody was scattering, going to their own location.
For me as a child, and for every one of my friends, church was our society. It was the main point of contact that we had, even beyond school. This was our society. This is where we came to know each other and to be part of each other's lives.
You only had one parent or two parents. You had a whole neighborhood that they minded everything that you did and everything that you said. I remember my grandmother waiting for me with the switch one day because a neighbor had called her on the telephone and told her, said, "I heard that boy cussing." And she asked me what I said. And I don't know who it was that told on me, but that's the way it was back in those days, you know.
St. Mark's started as a group that met in one of the people's homes in 1912. The number of people who met in that house grew to the point where they knew they needed to have a dedicated place to worship in the neighborhood. So they didn't go too very far to purchase this land that this church sits on. They built this foundation in 1918, and they worshiped in it, roofed it over, and used it as a one-story flat-roofed place to worship for 10 years.
And the pews came down from the steps on both sides, and they came all the way out to this last pillar. And there was a section back there that they removed where the stage is still there, but everything else is gone. And the only thing I can remember, it was cold down here. You know, all we had for heat was that potbelly stove set right in that corner there. And I do remember how I had to come over here with my father every Sunday morning, build a fire. And I remember coming over here to shovel the coal to put in that coal bin back there. And, you know, that was every August. The first week of August, the second week of August, all you'd see was this big mound of coal. And I said, oh man, it's coal shoveling time, you know.
Our church had a reputation for our choirs. We were always invited somewhere. Getting into the junior choir was, you know, something that I said, oh boy, this is really great.
We had a male chorus here that at one time we had 13 members. We traveled all over Pennsylvania. We went to Maryland, we went to Chicago, West Virginia.
We had another group that I was more or less responsible for called The Other Group. We started out with 4 of us singing, and we sang all over the city of Pittsburgh. Once we became known, we were just going all the time because everybody wanted to hear The Other Group. We originally wanted to call ourselves Charlie's Angels because our pastor at that time was Reverend Charles Buckner. But being as they had Charlie's Angels on TV, they thought that was a little risque, so we settled for The Other Group.
The street adjacent to here, Swissvale Avenue, it was a very narrow street, so 1926 and 27, that street was widened, and the neighboring church around the corner, which was Calvary Presbyterian Church, went from having a very nice side yard on Swissvale Avenue to having their church sticking out over the sidewalk. So they really had no yard at all, and they didn't like that, and they really wanted to not be right smack on the street. So they decided they would remove the building and build a new church. But what they did was they felt they needed to build their church first, the second church that they would be using. So Calvary built a new church, and then they were ready to tear down the one they had. And that's when the people of St. Mark AME asked if they could purchase those building materials to build their church. The building was carefully deconstructed, and all the members of this church got their own wheelbarrows and went over to the site where the church had been dismantled carefully and they brought the doors over, and the stained glass windows, and wheelbarrows full of brick, and they just kept, all the parishioners participated in that. Rather astonishing that they wanted to be hands-on, to be part of the new worship space they were developing. So they had their dedication, I believe it was in 1928, when this church was finished. And from what I was researched, that it was the new design of this church was one of the very early, only African-American architects in the city of Pittsburgh.
It is so ornate. Even if you look at the structure of the bricks that line the top of the building, that was someone who really thought that out. It didn't just happen. And if you walk inside the building, the light that comes through the windows is absolutely warming. It's inviting. If you've ever been in a place where you have no windows and the brilliance of the light doesn't come through, you'll sit there. But in this place, the beauty of the light that comes through the stained glass windows is an invitation all by itself.
They are lovely windows, and I was told the ones with the pictures on it are probably adapted from well-known paintings. I believe Heinrich Hoffmann, and there was another painter who also did similar work. In the back of our church, there's a wonderful window. Many people have admired it, but it contains a definite mystery. We don't quite know, aside, of course, from the figure of Christ, who's pictured there. We don't know because we don't know the exact scripture that this might be referring to, but we also don't know who's pictured there because the woman literally has lost her face through aging and withering. And this is something that we most certainly want to correct and have, I guess, as almost as a show point of the beautiful stained glass windows that we do have here.
This weekend, I attended, unfortunately, a funeral for a young man, a very young man that died. And I met a lady named Mrs. Johnson. She says, I had such fond memories in St. Mark. And she listed the things that she remembered. She says, I can tell you so many beautiful stories. That's what you want. That's what we hold on to. And for her, those were sacred moments. As long as the church continues to build that type of foundation, then we have something that we stand on.
And we've been through some hard times here, but we do as much as we can to keep it going.
It's still St. Mark, and I'm grateful and thankful for having the opportunity to have spent most of my life here.
All other ground is sinking sand.